Hello and welcome everybody to the EverydayFI podcast, the show that explores the lives and stories of everyday people on the path to financial independence. Hearing these stories will teach you in real ways how to forge your own path to financial freedom. I'm Megan. Wait, no, that's not right. Something's a bit off here. I'm Mitch, sitting in for Meghan Combs, your normal host. And in today's episode, I get to chat with a guest that you should be excited to hear from. So if you're a regular listener of this show, perhaps you've never gotten all the pieces to the puzzle put together. And if you're a new listener to the show, you get a chance to better understand our guest in a little bit more depth and in one cohesive thought. So today we're going to talk about career shifts, money mindsets, early money lessons, maybe some travel experience, and a whole bunch more. So with that teaser, please stay tuned for the reveal of our guest on the other side of a word from our sponsors. All right, everybody, welcome back. I am so excited to introduce you to our guest that you already know. Meghan Combs is normally the regular, always and often host of this show, but today she turned the reins over to me. So Meghan, welcome to your own show. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you. Yeah, I put glasses on to see if I could, be a whole different person. Maybe people wouldn't recognize me. Isn't that how that works? That's how Superman does it. You don't recognize Clark Kent from Superman because of the glasses. No, hi everybody. Yeah, I'm Megan. Many of you have not met me yet, but some of you have at some campfires and things like that. Like I just got back from Campfire Spain. I met a lot of you. And if you're listening, and yeah, I'm happy to be here answering my own questions in the hot seat. I'm kind of nervous, to be honest.
Really? You're nervous to be on the other side of the camera?
Yeah, when you're grilling somebody else, it's not as nerve-wracking as when you're like, "Oh crap, I have to think of something like eloquent and meaningful to say." So, yeah.
I don't think you got to worry about being eloquent or meaningful. You just got to tell your story. And through it, we're going to find threads and things that are going to help people out. And once in a while, as we tell our own story, we learn or maybe realize or come to understand some things about ourselves that we maybe didn't quite recognize on our own until you're kind of forced to say it out loud. And I'm not going to take offense to you saying grilling people because that means you think I'm about to grill you. Perhaps that's because of the discussion we had pre-recording where I was kind of rifling off about some stuff in my work world, but I promise I'm not here to grill you. And for prospective future guests, Meghan isn't going to grill you either. So if you want to be on the show, we create a warm and fostering and fun environment where you get a chance to talk about your money journey and money story. So for the audience, since I know quite a bit about Meghan, I don't know her complete story, of course, right? I've heard bits and pieces like each of you have along the way. So my goal today is to stay as curious as possible. And that's my goal so much that it's the only thing on my prep notes page that's bright red, because that way I'll remember it again and again as much as I can. So I don't think it'll be easy, but I'm going to attempt it as much as I can to make sure that we run this as normal as possible and just draw out as good of a story and an understanding as we can. So with that said, let's jump into Meghan's money story. So to kick off, I'm really curious, what is one of your earliest money memories?
Yeah, and this is a hard one for me because a lot of my early money memories are not necessarily happy ones because I grew up with parents who got divorced when I was 3 years old and my brother was 6 months years old. So had a single mom for most of my life, and so money was always tight. I mean, that's just how it goes when you have 2 kids, I think. And, during the divorce process, like, there was I'm not gonna get into the particulars, but basically no child support was allotted for her, so she had to do it on her own, and it made money tight a lot of the time, and my mom was a very career-driven woman too. So, as many of you might have heard before, she retired recently from being CFO of Berkshire Hathaway Carolinas. So, she worked her way up to being, like, in the C-suite from being a single mom, and, she was an accountant back then as well, but it just made things a little bit harder, and she didn't get a lot of support from the family because she had 4 other siblings, and so her parents couldn't necessarily, like, help her out in the early years. One of the earlier money memories that kind of stands out to me is we moved in with my grandparents when I was around 12, I believe, and they lived in Colorado, we had been living in North Carolina, and it just got to a point where my mom was in a state where she just needed that support from her family. And so she, even though I believe she was like almost 40 at that point, she was around my age, she was like, I need my parents, like I need this support. And so we moved in with them. And so we had a shared family household. And, I never really knew if it was financial related or emotionally related, but I'm pretty sure it was a combination of both because at the time she was actually going through early menopause, similar to me as well. Unfortunately, back then, people just didn't support women, going through that as much. And so she just really needed that support. But I see it as a money memory because we were living in a shared household. And so it made the dynamics of the household a little different. And so there were times when, my grandparents were the ones who were like buying the food and like cooking the food and providing everything. I do remember a time when I think I was about 14 or 15. I was definitely in my rebellious stage. I had like sheared off my hair. I wanted to dye it weird colors and things like that. And I was wearing really big baggy clothes and skater shoes. I was an angry kid because I don't know, just because why are we all angry at that point? And I remember, I think my mom went on a meditation retreat at this time, which I was like, wait a second, we're living with our grandparents. You tell us that you can't afford to buy us new shoes, and yet you're going on a meditation retreat. This isn't the real story. This is just how Megan's teenage brain remembered it. I just want to make that very clear, especially if my mom is watching this. That was teenage Megan's perspective. I know now that that's not really what happened. It's, my mom really needed that emotional support, and meditation is really how she comes back to herself and is able to kind of be a better person for her kids. So it was actually a really good decision for her to make. But teenage Megan was like, I'm so angry. And I saw it about money. I was like, how can you afford doing this, but you can't afford to buy us shoes? And in retaliation, while she was gone, I pierced my eyebrow with a safety pin. So, yeah.
That's amazing. So we have a lot of common threads in our history. That's very interesting. And I don't even have to try and stay curious because you've just revealed a ton that I already didn't know. And it's very interesting. We have a lot of similar backgrounds, minus the pierced eyebrow. But since you finished with that being very light, I need you to answer this real quick. I got to know, were your skater shoes Etnies? Because there's a specific meme that tells me that you were probably wearing Etnies.
I wish I remembered the brand. I really don't. It's like they were like the big fat ones that almost fall off your feet. Do you know what I'm talking about?
That was 80% of the skater shoes back then. There's a good chance they were
Yeah.
Etnies. All right, I totally understand. So I'm really curious. So when you moved in with your grandparents, I think you had mentioned it was about the age of 12. But prior to that, were you old enough when your parents were still together to have heard them talk about money as a couple when they were together, or as they were maybe progressing towards the potential and prospective divorce, or were you too young?
Yeah, I was way too young. I mean, I know what the conversations are now because I've heard stories of them, and it was definitely fraught with like emotion and anger and fighting, and it's one of the reasons they got divorced. My father is somebody who is hard to talk about because I love him, but he's an incredibly dysfunctional human being, and he kind of always has been. And so back then, it was about him not following through on a lot of things. He was a lawyer. He had his own practice. He had a law partner. And I believe there was a point where he left that practice and he was unemployed for a little while. I might be getting my timelines wrong because, again, I was like 3 years old, so I don't really remember. And so my mom was kind of carrying the financial burden. So I think that's one of the reasons why she was like, might as well divorce this guy because, like, I'm already basically a single parent because he's not bringing in anything except unemployment. And I do remember her telling stories about him, like, sleeping on the couch and, like, not actually going and looking for jobs and stuff like that. But I don't remember any of this. I'm sure it shaped me as a child because I think there was a lot of anger, a lot of yelling towards the end there. And I know it shaped my brother, my poor brother, who was only 6 months old, listening to this in the background. Like, I can't imagine. But it's something that with me and Chris, I definitely want us to have really good communication about money because of how fraught my parents' relationship with each other and with money and money with each other was.
Yeah, that's a really interesting place to go because I find myself in discussions regularly. And I was just talking to a friend this week about the things that we grew up with. We either lean into them and let them control us, or we look at them and it seems like we go the complete polar opposite direction. And I think it's really rare that you see somewhere in between, unless maybe you see it and you're like, oh, I don't want to go there. I know where I want to get, but I have no idea how to get there. So I think maybe there's a transition phase where we work towards what you're trying to accomplish right now, where you're setting the stage for you and Chris to have healthier money relationship discussions, openness, and eventually dialogue in front of your future family. And you've had a lot of time to figure that out along the way. And so you'll be very equipped when that happens. But I think for maybe everyday people that are recognizing it after they already have kids, I think it's more of a transition phase that people would experience. So clearly you were too young to truly understand, even if there were money discussions going on. What about between maybe your mom and your grandmother? I'm curious if there were ever any like money discussions between then about her situation, your family's situation that you were maybe exposed to.
Not so much. It's one of those things where, like, when you're young, you're not really paying attention to the parents, at least not for me. Like, I could care less about what they were talking about. So I don't think I was privy to any of those conversations. I will also say that my family is very, like, you don't talk about money. Even today, my mom still hasn't told me how much money she was making when she retired. Like, she hasn't told me what her salary was. So she just is like, "It's around this." And I'm like, "Okay. You've told me exactly how much your retirement portfolio is, but you still refuse to tell me your salary." I just think that's funny. But no, it was kind of, buttoned down. My grandmother was a classic homemaker, so she didn't have a job that brought an income. I think the closest thing that she had was she was an artist. She actually painted this, and she sold a lot of her art later on in her life after her kids moved out. And I don't know how much she made off of that, but that was the closest thing that she had to a career, was being an artist. And she's really good. Like, I mean, that's beautiful, a beautiful painting. It's a really big painting. I know you guys can't see how big it is, but it's huge. For anybody who's watching on YouTube, if you people are like listening on podcasts and are like, "What are you talking about?" Go check us out on YouTube because you can see the painting of my grandmother. I do know my mom told me this story about my grandmother one time, and I wasn't privy to this conversation, but I think it's really interesting. So, my grandparents lived in Denver, Colorado, very expensive city, and they bought the house in the times when interest rates for homes were like 17, 18%. Crazy. And she put together a plan to pay the house off early because she was the one who paid the bills. That's very common back then for the stay-at-home moms, homemakers, to be the ones who actually paid the bills and the men to bring in the money, right? And so she was that person. And so she was looking at their mortgage statement and she was like, and like the amortization schedule too, which she was a brilliant person. So I really would have been curious what her career might have been if she was able to do that. But she was looking at the statement and she's like, we're paying so much in interest. And if I just added this payment to the schedule, and I don't remember exactly like the plan itself, I think it was either like an extra payment a year or it was an extra amount towards principal every month. It was something like that. But she was like, if I do that, I can pay this off 10 years earlier. And she did it and she paid the house off 10 years earlier. And I think when we were living in the house, she had already paid it off by that point. So they had only owned the home. And I think they had a 15-year mortgage. So she paid the house off in like 5 years. Yeah. So it was crazy. And I might be getting that all wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was a 15-year mortgage. And so because they were trying to get the lowest rate possible. And I was like, wow, that's so cool. So it was interesting that that was one of the stories that she told my mom as an adult. And so that was kind of their relationship, is like they did have a little bit of openness about how to pay bills and stuff like that. I think probably because she may have seen that my mom needed a little bit of help because my mom was the single parent. My mom actually did talk to my grandfather a little bit about her career and things like that, because my grandfather was a salesperson for petroleum companies, I believe, is what he kind of was. So he traveled a lot and sold petroleum products. I don't know the ins and outs of exactly what he did, but I know he was in the petroleum industry and he was a salesperson. And so that was kind of a link that my mom and her father had, was that they were both career driven people. And so he would kind of talk to her about career stuff. So yeah, I don't know if that is like answering the question.
It certainly did in a roundabout and even more thorough way, which is helpful because when we're really trying to understand on a deeper level, how might these experiences have shaped us and influenced us, whether immediately in our adulthood when we become real adults and get that first job and get that huge salary that we come out of college with, huge in air quotes and ha ha ha, not huge when we come right out of college. It certainly informs us, but the the whole theme of the expensive interest and home payments and all that is such a unique topic because it's not something we get to really explore deeply in the financial independence community. I think people do tend to explore it, but most often what we hear is there's no point in hurrying up and paying off your home because the interest is so low on the home mortgage that you're better off using that money that you would have used to pay down principal to invest, and you'll increase your net worth, you'll increase your overall savings as long as you have a long period of time. But that same lesson that you took away from your grandparents through your mother, I believe, is the same lesson that I took away from my aunt and uncle who informed this same thought process to me. It's so interesting. So when you were saying, I can't remember if she said if I make one more payment a year or a little bit more per month, I can hear my Aunt Janie and Uncle Don talking about how they had this really high interest on their mortgage. And I remember them saying that a mortgage takes about 30 years to pay off. But if you make just $100 a month extra, it equals about one extra payment. And it turns that 30-year loan to like an 18-year loan or something like that. And I remember just my mind exploding as a kid because I grew up on government assistance, welfare, food stamps, whatever you want to call it. The whole story, the whole song, and the whole dance. Single mom, limited or no child support, different dads involved, all of that. And also ended up living at my grandmother's house for some period of time as well. And for us, it truly was financial. So it's just really intriguing that we had the same general stories and lessons making it to us because our grandparents or aunts and uncles were living through a similar time period and making big decisions such as buying a house during said time period. And then some of those same money lessons came away. And yet we can understand if we were in that situation, why we'd make the decision that they made. But because we're in our situation and we're able to understand why they made theirs and why we may not make the same one today, it's kind of intriguing. So outside of that, how do you think all of that, when you look at the experience of when you're 3 at home, mom and dad, and then when you were 12 and older, maybe those limited discussions or the ongoing discussions you've had about money with your family, is there anything in there that you think may have shaped or informed kind of who you are and how you handle your career, your money, your investing, your mindset, and maybe even your relationships in some ways?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I might need to give a little more context because I don't know how much I gave here, but my grandparents and my mom's side of the family are probably considered in the top 10%, right? They were very wealthy people. I mean, even with a stay-at-home mom, my grandfather being a salesperson in the petroleum industry and, you know, advancing in his career to be probably the head of the department and all of that. He made quite a bit of money. And it was something that I think kind of my mom saw as how her life should have been and wasn't because, she chose somebody that she loved and that person turned out to not be the person she thought. And so she got divorced at a time that she just was not prepared to do that. And she was thrown into this situation of scarcity, right? Even though she was an accountant. So it's not like she had to work at like a grocery store or something, or she was like a stay-at-home mom that had to go to a grocery store. But she still was on one income and had to really make it work. And I think what I did see in my childhood was her trying to have the lifestyle I think she thought she was meant to have. So fancier houses, nicer neighborhoods. We were almost always in the white suburban areas. I remember around 8 years old, we bought a house in Houston, Texas that was like 3 or 4,000 square feet. It was huge on a cul-de-sac in Friendswood, Houston. So it was outside of Houston. And I love the name of that neighborhood as a kid because I was like, Friendswood, I'm going to make friends here. Anyway, and she loves to tell me this. And this is going to make everybody like go, no. So this was, okay, so if I was 8 years old, this was 1995. And she bought the house for, I think they listed it for $105,000 and she bought it for $102,000. And I think she was making $45,000 a year. Can you imagine getting a 4,000 square foot house in a suburban neighborhood of Houston for that amount of money? Doesn't that blow your mind?
Man.
But I don't know what her interest rate was. I don't know anything about that. I don't know if she was able to afford the house. But it's stuff like that that I wonder if she would have been in a better financial position if she would have maybe not tried to get those kinds of houses, like because we didn't need 4,000 square feet. There was three of us, and we were little. I was 8, my brother was 5. We did not need that much, space. And it was a gorgeous house. Like we loved it, but we didn't need it. But it's interesting because she kind of popped around to different things because after she got divorced, we were in an apartment. We called it the lake house. And it was because the apartment complex was on a lake, but it was an apartment. And then we moved to this house, and then we moved to a duplex, and then we moved into a more modest house in North Carolina. So it was weird. She kind of bounced around. And the interesting thing is she bought every single house. So she never rented except for the apartment. She always bought the houses. So I find that really interesting. And anyway, all this to say that I feel like there was a lot of keeping up with the Joneses because when you're raised in a certain way where you are affluent and in an affluent family, even with 5 children, like they still were able to give their children quite a bit of support and things like that. And they had really nice houses. All of my aunts and uncles have very nice homes and are doing pretty well. I think there's one that isn't, but everybody supports her. So it's just coming from that. And then now she has this friend group that also, they're all married. They're all very wealthy. They all have really nice homes, really nice cars. She has a lot of that keeping up with the Joneses. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because I think that trickled down to me a little bit when I was younger, because we would make this joke that anytime we were shopping for something, we wouldn't look at prices of things, but we would gravitate towards the most expensive items, not because we saw the price, but because we saw quality and we were like, I want this expensive item. And then we look at the price and be like, whoa, just kidding. So I think that definitely trickled down to me. I don't know about my brother, but it definitely trickled down to me. And that caused me to become definitely a spender. Like I wanted that extravagant lifestyle. I think I made the joke before on the show that I was living in New York City on $25,000 average a year. So in the beginning, I was living on $15,000 and trying to live like a Kardashian, buying clothes all the time, going out into bars, buying friends drinks, eating out all the time. People talk about generational trauma. I think there's also generational lessons learned about money and how it's supposed to be. And I really believe finding the FI movement broke me out of that. And I will say I got my money together before finding the FI movement. It actually was Jean Chatzky's Her Money that helped me do that. But that was more around like, let's spend within our means and like, you can still have this extravagant lifestyle, but just do it within where you are now. But the FI, like finding FI, I realized extravagant life can mean something so different than just a bunch of stuff, And so I was able to change my mindset because I was definitely about stuff, fancy stuff before that.
What a masterful segue as we move on to the next portion of the show. But before we do, as you were saying, the keeping up with the Joneses side, I was curious because my goal is to stay curious today. But I had a feeling, if I remembered right, that you had started to get your money together before finding the FI movement. And the whole keeping up with the Joneses is this typical concept that we in the FI community and those that gravitate towards the FI community have either already figured out or they're about to figure out pretty quickly that you can't really keep up with the Joneses and accomplish early financial independence unless you have a tremendously outsized income. And so was that something you ripped the Band-Aid off and just immediately stopped keeping up with the Joneses and started living life on your income? Or was it something that you had to work through and migrate towards? And that could be before you got your money together, while you were getting it together, and before and during the first phases when you found the FI movement, as that'll kind of transition us into where we'd like to go next anyways, which is kind of where you're at and where you're going on your journey.
Yeah, so I found the FI movement in 2019. I heard Brad and Jonathan on the Her Money podcast. So, because that was my go-to podcast at the time. And they were talking about retiring early. And I remember being like, ooh, I want to retire early because I hate working. And hate is a strong word. I was like, I'd prefer not to work. And I think I have the typical FI story where I found the movement and then just like slashed all my expenses as cheaply as possible. I binged their entire show. I think it took me 6 months to get through all the episodes because I was quite far behind by 2019. I think they had 3 years going, something like that. And I was trying to figure out what path to take because back in 2019, the FI movement was still about get to a 50% savings rate, cut your expenses, pay off debt, live as cheaply as you possibly can. And it's morphed a little bit now, and we can get to that in a second. But I was balancing, okay, do I pay off my student loans early? How much can I cut? And I just viciously cut everything. I stopped eating out completely. I stopped buying clothes. I switched my phone plan to Mint, all of that. I'm still on Mint and I still like them. So I actually just paid the bill and it was only $199 for the year. It has not changed. It's crazy. And I did all of this over a 1 to 2 year period too. So it wasn't like all at once. And I do remember making one mistake. I see it as a mistake. Other people might not. But during COVID, when the student loan stuff was happening where they stopped the payments and they stopped the accrual of interest. I don't remember exactly what they were doing, to be honest, because it was 5 years ago. But I took the opportunity to put extra payments toward my loans and got that paid down. I think I paid down like $10,000 in a year period, which I know doesn't sound like very much, but I was only making around $60,000 a year. So that was pretty good. And I actually regret doing that because, first of all, the interest rate was 0 at the time, I'm pretty sure. And then I refinanced to a 3.4% interest rate. And that $10,000 would be so much more money now if it was in the market. So I kind of kick myself for doing that. But anyway, I think you asked about salary. So when I found the FI movement, I was making $55,000 a year. I think I got a raise to 65. And I did start branching out around who I was listening to and started listening to Paula Pant as well. And she mentions you can only cut your expenses so much. Where you have infinite gains is your income. And I was like, okay, so let's look at that. And so I got a new job that paid me, I went from 65,000 to 95,000. I remember crying getting that offer because it was almost like a 50% pay bump. And then from there, I got a few raises. So I ended that at 105 and got laid off. And the hilarious thing is my layoff year was actually my biggest income year because the company was acquired and the acquisition happened earlier in that year, so around January. So I got a buyout. It was only around, I think, like $10,000 or something like that. But that was a big chunk of money. And then I got a severance package for being laid off, which was around $15,000. And I had my salary. And then I got a contract job 2 weeks after being laid off that paid me $80 an hour, which is a lot. And so I actually made more money in that year than I've ever made. I think it was like $170,000 in that year. And I was like, okay. So I was laid off and jumping job to job, but look at how much money I made. And then got the job I have now. And now I make 147.5. So like I really jumped that salary quite hugely, right? And then during all of that, the morphing of the FI movement going into less cut everything, live like a monk, and more live to your values. So I started doing that as well. And this salary allows me to live my values and still have a quite high savings rate. I think we're saving, I just did the math at Campfi Spain. It's like between $80,000 and $85,000 a year. And that includes 401ks, HSAs, cash, all of that. So between the two of us. And I think our gross salary is 242. So whatever that percentage is, I think it's around 30. So it doesn't seem very high, but 30 is a lot higher than most people. And so once we pay down a little bit more debt, we're going to get it to 50, but we are not feeling the pain of that at all because the salary is so high, but our lifestyle is still that middle class lifestyle, even though we have like an upper class or an upper middle class salary. We are able to live a lifestyle that's very comfortable for us. We actually just made the decision to stay in our home after having a kid too. So that's even going to be better because we were going to upgrade to a different house. And I was like, I don't want to do that. Babies are so small. They don't take up much room. Let's like try this house, see how it goes. You know, if we hate it, then we can do it. But let's give this house a shot. This house is a 2-bedroom, 1.5 bath. So it's kind of small. When you increase your salary, but you don't increase your lifestyle with the salary, that's where that gap really is. But when you increase your salary, you can start living a life that's kind of at that middle class lifestyle, which is really nice. That's a really nice lifestyle, right? And if you just forget all the people who have big houses and fancy cars and just say, what do I really need? What do I really value? Then, you know, that's where the money's at. Pun
Yeah.
intended. And I am not saying anything that's unique, right? We've heard all of this before, but I'm just saying, like, I have lived this. I am living this, and I am an example of this. So,
Yeah. I think that's a perfect way to put it, right? Is you're not necessarily putting out new information. Okay. But this show is for people who are either on the path to FI or interested in becoming part of the path to FI. And by hearing that you did it too, they start to put themselves in your shoes and either say, wow, my life looks and sounds a lot like what Meghan's life used to look like a few years back. Therefore, I could make these changes. Now, interestingly, you did the classic rip the Band-Aid off, cut your expenses down to nothing, living on rice and beans and ramen and whatever else, right? I'm putting some words into your mouth and some food for that matter, but you did all of that. And then you looked around and said, yeah, this ain't quite for me. And you leveled back up your spend a little bit and you lived it out. And then it sounds to me like maybe I might be inferring something, but it sounds to me like maybe you waited until your income caught up to allow you to expand your lifestyle instead of expanding your lifestyle at the expense of a savings rate.
yeah. So when I went to that 95 bump, I had a condo at the time when that happened. And the condo, I think, was only around $1,100 a month total with mortgage and HOA, not including utilities, but all it was electricity. So that I had to pay. So that was like between 60 and 100, depending on the season. So let's give it 1,200. And I had roommates. And so half that. So I was paying like $600 a month on housing. It was nothing. But I hated that condo. I hated it. It smelled. It had plumbing issues all the time. It always had roaches everywhere because they wouldn't treat the buildings on the outside like they said they would, but they didn't. The pool never worked. Our HOA was almost half of my mortgage because they wouldn't do any of the work and they kept, anyway, I hated the place. And so when I got that $95,000 salary, that happened. And then I think 6 months after that, my HOA was like, oh, we have to put on a new roof. And because we haven't saved any money, you have to pay for it. And I'm like, I'm sitting here paying $500 a month in an HOA fee and I still have to pay for this roof. What are you good for? Anyway, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And I bought the current house I'm in now. That was an upgrade because this is a single family home with a beautiful garden. It's not an upgrade space-wise. It actually is smaller than the condo, which I think is funny. But it does have a detached garage and stuff like that. So it is an upgrade. So I upgraded based on salary in that I did do it at that 95 point, but I didn't wait until I got the 147 because I could never imagine getting this kind of salary. Like, I feel like I make too much money. I hope my boss isn't listening because he'll probably be like, all right, if you make too much money, let's downgrade you.
Definitely don't apologize for your salary, right? It is funny, like once you start earning a salary like that or above it, like your 180 year, and I've been in high earnings years myself, especially as somebody that grew up living with my grandma at times, right? It doesn't feel real. It's almost like monopoly money. How am I allowed to have this? Am I worth this? Am I worthy of this? When are they going to figure me out? All the imposter syndrome stuff that we talked about, gosh, 20 episodes back in arrears, something like that. It's wild to think about that and just accept that this is where we're at. I'm earning this. I'm worth it. I did the things that it took to get to where I am today. So certainly don't apologize that. I'm sure you're worth every penny and potentially even more in case your boss is listening. So I I want to go back a little bit to one comment, and then I promise we're going to move forward in the episode. You made a comment about paying off your student loans during the COVID timeline being a mistake. For the sake of the audience, I'd like people to think through this, because somebody could walk away and maybe beat themselves up over a mistake that they made. And instead, I'd like us to look at and acknowledge the situation for what it is, which is kind of a product of resulting. If you've ever heard of Amy Duke, she's a poker player, has a great book. She talks about how we often look back in time and decide something was a bad decision or not the best decision because of how the result turned out. And that decision can't be bad, because the result is you are student loan debt free or closer to student loan debt free as a result of that decision. Now, it may not have been the most optimal decision, but you can't today perfectly put yourself back in the mindset that you were in when you looked at the world around you. There was fear of COVID. People were dying. There was an opportunity to make 100% of that payment go to principal. You never know when you're going to get that chance again, right? Now, mathematically, was it the right decision? Turns out the answer was no, but you made the best decision that you could at that time. And it certainly wasn't even a bad decision. And so I'll say this. I can put myself in your shoes and say I've invested in things that I should not have invested in. Looking back in time, they were the best decision that I could make at the time, but I can look back and see how that decision was flawed. But I didn't see the flaw at the time because of whatever was going on in my life at that moment, and looking back in arrears isn't fair. And that's where this turns into this resulting context, is we look at the result and try and say the decision was wrong, when in actuality, it just wasn't the most optimal decision, but it was the best thing you could do at the time, and it made sense to you then, and you're probably at peace with it then. And let's be real, you have $10,000 fewer student loans today than you did back then, and that can't be that bad, right? I mean, that's a pretty good situation to be in. So
Yeah, no, I agree. And I love Annie Duke. She talks about a lot of different biases, and resulting is one of them. This specific resulting bias, that's exactly what I did. And it's so funny that you're saying this, because I think I've literally said this on the show before to somebody else. So you're quoting me back to me, because it's so funny how we can give advice to other people and we can see things so clearly when it's other people. I'm like, oh, no, that's not a bad decision, because, hindsight's 2020, and you made the decision based on the information that you had, et cetera, et cetera. And yet I can't do that for myself. So thank you for, being me to me for a second there, and calling me back. Because yes, when you said that, like, that is exactly what went through my head. Is I was like, oh my God, it's 0%. All of this is going to principal. Let's shove some money in there, because I really do hate having student loans. And I got through hating student loans. Instead of paying them all off, I actually dealt with the feeling around the student loans rather than letting the feeling drive the decisions. I was like, okay, why do I hate this? What does this feeling mean? Is there a way that I can channel this somewhere differently and think about it differently? And that was what allowed me to make more optimal decisions about the student loans, and kind of releasing myself from the emotion around it. The emotion came from the degree that I paid for, I'm not using, because that career failed. And I feel like a failure because that career failed. So that is why it was so much more of a burden than just the money around my neck. And I wanted to just be free of it. But I think contending with those feelings of like, I'm a failure because I didn't do well in my first career, and letting that go allowed me to see this as just a loan with an interest rate and make decisions that way.
yeah, I think it's great. And I know I already said it. You're probably worth every bit of what you're worth, and maybe even more. And certainly you're not a failure because you didn't make that original degree and plan for your career life work. People pivot, change, adjust. And I'd say you're probably maybe even more impressive for being able to let that go and let that be a part of your fun life. Like, let art be your pursuit for fun, for passion, for joy in other ways, while focusing on taking care of your values through your earnings today. I think we've hit kind of how you found the FI movement and what sort of drew you in. So the one thing I don't ultimately know, and I'm supposed to stay curious anyways if I keep reminding yourself, Meghan, what's your why of FI? Why do you want to do all this ultimately?
Yeah, it's great that we're having this conversation right now, because I just had a call with my career coach last week, and she My company pays for her, which is awesome, but they know nothing about what goes on in our conversations. So of course I tell her that I want to quit my job in the next like 5 to 10 years. And she's like, cool, let's talk about this. I think she enjoys it because I'm different than her other clients. Everybody else is like, how do I up level in my career? And she's like, I get to talk to somebody about leaving their career in their 40s. So we did a point A and point B exercise where it's like, where are you now, point A, and where do you want to be, point B? She actually used something that Alan Donegan uses, and it's the wheel, where you fill in rankings for each part of the wheel. And it's like health, work, hobbies, spirituality, family, relationship, and I think there's a couple others, but people just look it
Finances.
up. Yeah, finance. Of course, I forgot the like most important one. So she had me rank all of those, like how they're doing now, and talk through my top three and my lower three. That was a really cool place because it's like, okay, where are you starting and where do you want to go? And it really informed what my point B is going to be. And so she's like, okay, so where's your point B? And the reason I want to stop working is because I've seen what happens to people who stop working. They kind of get this glow up because they no longer have this stress in their life, especially with corporate jobs. They put so much on you and they make everything, especially in America, they make everything seem like life or death, right? At work, we were just talking about how we would love to add in some product discovery practices, which are the fun parts of being a product manager. And we were like, well, how are we going to do that? Our plates are already too full of doing this little crap that's meaningful, sure, but not fun. And so when your life is just full of the little crap that's not fun, you start to get dull and your shoulders shrug down. You start to sit lower. Your face starts to, it just, you look gray. And I say this because literally that's how my mom looked before she retired. She was a little bit heavy. She was almost gray, meaning her hair wasn't gray, but her skin was very dull. She was like kind of burdened. You could see the burden. She was unhappy. And then she retired, and literally 3 months later, she was up, vibrant. She was, I mean, literally glowing. She was beautiful. She lost weight. And I made the joke. I was like, are you pregnant? That's her glow up happened. And so I was like, I want that to happen to me because I feel like I'm in this part of my career where there's so much stress, there's so much that I have to worry about. And on top of that, I'm trying to have a baby in a way that's really difficult. And so there's so much sucking so much energy out of me that I want to get back that vitality that I used to have when I had less stress in my life. And that less stress came from having jobs that were not that stressful. There were stresses in other areas. I remember being afraid of never getting a real job when I was younger. I was like, I'm never going to have a real job. I'm always going to work in a restaurant. And now it's like, it would be nice to get back to that. I don't want to work in a restaurant, but it'd be nice to work at an art gallery or a plant nursery or something like that. And so I was telling her, here's what my life would look like. I would be involved in community things, community gardens, community art projects, community historic societies, things like that. I would love to do all three of those. My husband would do the same. He's actually adding some of that into his life now. He's going to be a photographer for the Durham Democrats, which is so cool. And so there was that aspect. And then I was like, and then I want to have, 2 kids, and I want to be able to walk them to school in the morning. There's this specific neighborhood in Durham that we want to live in eventually that has schools and daycares right there in the neighborhood, and it's all walkable. They have trails, they have sidewalks, they have all of it. And I was like, I want to be in that neighborhood, and I want to be able to walk to school with my kids for their entire life with my husband, because I want the kids at first to hear him and I talking as we're walking, because we have really good conversations when we walk. And then I want, whenever the kid is old enough, to bring them into the conversations and have that family time every single day, right? And then go home and enjoy a morning with my husband, drinking coffee, doing whatever, and then going and doing these community things, and then going and getting our kids. Like, it's such a slow, chill life, but you're still adding so much. You're still providing value because you're involved in a more, a smaller sphere, but you're still involved. I was like, that's what I want my life to be. And I can't do that if I'm working 8 to 6 every single weekday and having to do laundry on the weekends and having to stuff all of these chores in here and there and having to stuff in going to the gym right after work and then getting home and it's 7 and then we go to bed at 9 and there's only 2 hours of really any space. And of course, all the community stuff is closed by then. So there's really nothing to do. So that's my YFI. And my coach was like, how can we bring some of that in today? And she was like, what are you feeling when I say we can bring some of that in today? And I was like, doubtful. So yeah, I was like doubtful because this job is in the way. It takes up so much of my time. So yeah, that's my YFI.
Yeah, that's really thorough, and it takes us into kind of the next phase of the show anyway. But what I find super intriguing when you talk to people in the FI community, we tend to go on, I don't know if it's a path, if there's a curve, if there's a ramp up, whatever it is, but it's almost like you find it because you need a way out, or because you had some questions and you Googled the right thing and it hit you and you went, whoa. And then you go, I don't want to have this stupid job anymore. And that's your first, you're just, I got to get rid of this dumb job that I hate. My boss is terrible, but I can't quit because. And it becomes this, I have to figure it out to be able to escape is kind of phase one. And then we kind of get into it a little bit and we buy ourselves a little freedom along the way. When we knock off debt, we build the emergency fund, we expand our overall investment portfolio, and we start to build this comfort and this runway. And we kind of start to get to look around a little bit and be like, well, wait a minute, maybe I don't have to do this anymore. Maybe I can call my shots a little bit more. And then we start to free our minds up of that a little bit because we don't have that fight or flight burden because we have some runway. And then all of a sudden we start to think even further down the road of what do I really want? And I think it's maybe Scott Trench who says this, where he'll say, what does Tuesday look like? And I think you just described what Tuesday looks like for somebody who's supposed to be 60, 65, 70 and retired, but not with their littles that they're walking to school or to daycare. They're supposed to be maybe walking with their spouse to play racquetball, or what's that game everybody plays now with the paddles? It looks like
Pickleball.
pickleball.
Pickleball, yeah.
Pickleball, right? Like,
They could be
but
walking with their grandkids.
they could be walking with their
They could be
grandkids.
like the
Absolutely.
babysitters. Yeah. But
Yeah.
it should be the parents, because the parents, like, you want to have that connection with your kids. Like you said before we started recording, you want to spend time with your kid every single day and beat him at Rubik's Cubes. Sorry, I had to bring that in. I'm sorry. So, y'all, he was talking about his kid is so fast at solving Rubik's Cubes, but when they're competing right next to each other, Mitch is faster. And he's like, yeah, I can beat him. And I'm like, I love how you want to beat your 8-year-old.
I like to beat him in all kinds of games. And for the record, not only do I beat him, but he has the speed cube and I have the OG like basic Rubik's Cube, which anybody who knows them, they bind up. They're not as fast, they're not as quick, they're not as smooth. And so head to head, I can still take him on. But as soon as he figures out how to survive that, the competitor's mind that's holding him back, we're in trouble because he's going to get faster and faster and faster.
Yeah, he's going to smoke you so much.
Yeah. Okay, so I think you kind of answered this, but I'm curious. I think we've gotten a look at, we know what your Wi-Fi is. We understand what a Tuesday might look like for you. We know you want less work and more community, but I'm curious, do you think you're quitting work altogether, or do you think you'll take on something else that might be paid work?
Yeah, so I think to get to the goal of having a less stressful life, I think it is imperative that we do take on some paid work. The kind of paid work we would take on would be part-time or less stress. So that's the goal. So it's kind of barista-fy without being a barista. I don't really know if I want to be a barista. I mean, maybe I enjoyed it, but I didn't enjoy working on weekends and stuff like that. So I would like to find something like that that's just, something that brings in income and enjoyable, but I don't have to bring it home at night or worry about Slack notifications when like there's a fire at work or whatever. But I think it will be something that we probably have to do, because even though our savings rate is around 30%, and I think we could probably get it to 40 within the next 2 years, I think we need so much that I'm not sure we're going to make that number by the time we want to leave corporate. And so we're kind of doing hey, let's still have some work and only pull 1 to 2% from our portfolios instead. Or let's have some work and just pay our expenses and not do savings anymore and just live that way until we can start pulling from the portfolio.
That certainly answers the question. So I like the mindset, and I am currently living this out, as you do know about me, that I have reached a version of financial independence. It's not quite the lifestyle FI that I want. And what's interesting is, even though I know it, I think I forget it because I'm not fully where I want to be. whenever I take a second and I remember, oh, wait, if I wanted to, I could be ClimberFi. I could be Chris and go work at, we have this place called Vertical Endeavors. I don't know if that's a national thing or if that's an us thing, but indoor climbing gym, which you have to have when you're in Minnesota because it's cold half the year and you can't climb outside. But I could go work there part-time or even full-time and leave the stress out of it and only draw 1 or 2, maybe even 3% off my portfolio instead of the 4% that we're shooting for to be able to. And that really is a huge weight off your shoulders. When you look around, it's not a 0 or 1. It's not an all in or you are FI or you aren't. This spectrum that we're living out is real. So I can absolutely understand how when you first said, in order for it to be stress free, and I was really waiting to hear what you said because I didn't know if you're about to tell me 1 more year syndrome, or if you're about to tell me sequence of returns risk, or if you're about to tell me what you ended up telling me, which is just that we need a lot and we might not get there as fast as we'd like. And I don't know that I'll make it through the corporate grind all the way to the finish line. I may need to, or I may want to tap out sooner in exchange for that flexibility to go do something that I know, like, and enjoy. And then I still think maybe you can tell me if you think you can see this vision in the future where you can do that part-time, not barista, because you said you didn't want to work in a restaurant. So maybe it's working at the local, I don't know, Bachman's Garden Center, whatever place where you can support people in their gardens part-time, but also doing some of that community stuff simultaneously. Do you see a vision of the future where that might be possible to do a little bit of both?
Yeah, so Durham is a really cool city and it's like an undiscovered cool city. So I'm hoping nobody discovers it. And, a lot of people are moving here, but it's not, everybody talks about Austin or Seattle or San Francisco or even Asheville or Boulder, right? Everybody knows about those cities and they might not be moving there, but they know that they're cool cities to live in and people really want to live there. Durham is one of those cities. It's just undiscovered. And it's also a little bit on the rough side still. There's some rough parts of town, so it's not quite there, but it will be there, I think, in like 10 years. And so there's a lot of opportunity to couple making money with giving back to communities. We have local nurseries, for example, where I could go work at the nursery, but they also provide community events of teaching people how to sustainably garden, how to plant plants that are local to our state or our region, how to attract certain pollinators, how to detract from bugs that might eat your food, how to plant food, how to get away from lawns and get into planting food. So I could see something like that. There's also a really big community arts space here. I actually connected with somebody who was the director of the Durham Arts Guild back when I was unemployed. I might get into, potentially either volunteering with them. And then if I'm the volunteer leads into like a part-time thing. So that's kind of where my mind is working something like that. What might happen is in the beginning, and if I'm like, okay, I'm ready to be done with work, what can I do right now quickly to bridge that gap and then look for something else? I might do the barista thing, right, in the beginning, and then look for that other opportunity that's a little bit more fulfilling, but also is less stress, just to bridge that gap so that I'm not waiting and still in this job that I don't like and waiting for that other opportunity. I will probably do something like that. Basically, I'll be very flexible. I want to be very
Yeah.
flexible because I want it to happen. I will say I am very worried that after I have my first child, we have 12 weeks of 100% paid parental leave, which is like, I was like, what? I'm going to be paid my full paycheck for 12 weeks to not do any work? That's awesome. So it's going to be really hard to go back to work after that. It's going to be so hard to go back to work, I think, especially probably with a baby at home. And I work from home. Some people might be like, oh, you might want to escape your child. I'm not escaping anything. I work from home. She's going to be right there in the next room. I say she, I'm not even pregnant yet. I'm just imagining I'm going to have a she. So, yeah.
That's well, that's good. I'm glad you can start to think about and start to connect those dots because a lot of times we look towards the future and it's nice to kind of map towards it. And then all of a sudden, the 5 years into the future version of us is like, what was I thinking? Like that wasn't the reality or that wasn't going to be possible. And once again, it's because we don't know who we are going to be 5 years from now. We don't know what's going to happen between now and then that's going to shape, mold, adjust, and change us as people. So flexibility remains key. And so I think we can probably shift gears and talk a little bit about struggles and wins. And so I'm curious, what are some of your struggles that you might be going through right now that perhaps the community could benefit and learn from?
Yeah, I mean, the one that's always top of mind and I've talked about, of course, repeatedly on here is the fertility stuff. And it's not just the fact that having fertility issues, which I kind of already knew I was going to have. Like, I had an inclination that that was going to be my reality even at 25. I won't go into why, but there were some tests that were done back then that kind of pointed to that. At 25, I didn't care because I was like, I don't want kids, so I don't care. But now I care. So that's a struggle because there's so many decisions to make and there's a lot of information to know outside of just having a baby. I mean, that's already a lot of information to know, but now I have to know all of this other stuff, about fertility, about donors, about cost. And, part of the struggle, of course, is the monetary part because it does set us back a little bit because it does look like we're going to have to do a donor. Chris and I just read an NIH paper recently about what I have and the chances of getting pregnant with the IVF medication that I'm doing, and it's a 1.3% chance. So it's very low. And so donor is between 60 and 70% chance of a live birth. So it's kind of a no-brainer, but it's when you do a donor, your insurance doesn't pay for any of it, right? You have to pay out of pocket for everything because your insurance isn't insuring this person, right? So everything that she's going through, the medication, the extraction, the storage, all of that you have to pay out of pocket. And so that is depleting my HSA fund, which I had originally intended to be part of my on ramp to early retirement because I was saving the receipts and going to live off of some of that money in that first 5 years when I'm waiting for my Roths to convert and stuff like that. Like, I have this whole plan of, the first 5 years we're going to save up cash or live on the HSA and the brokerage accounts while we wait for our Roths to do the conversion ladder thing. And then we can start pulling from that. That's my plan, by the way. And so it's not that much money. It's like $28,000 to $30,000, which I know some people are like, oh, that's a lot of money, but it's not even, it's a fraction of what we live on every year. So, but I think it's the growth potential that I'm sad we're going to miss out on. Right now it's not growing at all because it's in a cash account, it's money market, and, it's growing like 4% or whatever, but it's hard. And yeah, it's hard to have fertility issues because you, as a woman, you do feel a little bit like a failure. That's a whole other topic for another day. But yeah, that's the biggest struggle right now.
Yeah, I understand. And I didn't know if you were going to share that or share something that was maybe unique, but I will say that without going crazy deep in response, I am apologetic that it's something that we have to face and have to think through and have to deal with in general in your life and in society as a whole when people face this. But I can't imagine what it's like to try and reconcile the thoughts of, I want to have a family and a baby so badly, and I also want financial independence so badly. And there's probably a little bit of a tug of war there sometimes where we think to ourselves, and again, I'm projecting on you, so you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I hope to you is what I'm saying, that I hope that there's no hard feelings towards yourself for having the feeling of, this is a bummer that this also impacts my financial journey. I should just want to spend whatever it takes to make this my reality. And so I'm sorry that that's something that you have to wrestle with. And unless you have anything to add, I think we could transition to some wins.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing. I at Camp Fi, I did have one of the people there. So at this last Camp Fi in Spain, the majority of people I think were in their 40s, and I think half of them didn't have kids, and they were reaching Fi because a big reason was because they weren't having kids. And I had one person, I'm not going to say who. It is somebody that everybody probably knows, but he was like, "Can I convince you not to have kids?" Because he was like, it's such a financial burden. And I was like, absolutely not. You cannot convince me. There's no hard feelings about it. It's kind of like, oh, that's a bummer. But also, I'm kind of happy that the funds are there because if they weren't there, we wouldn't be able to do this at all. I mean, we would have, but we would have been paying penalties and stuff because we would have to pull it out of actual retirement accounts, or we'd have to sell. Like, Chris has a brokerage account, but a lot of that is his play money. So he has a lot of like Nvidia and solar panel stocks, like single stocks. And a lot of those are at a loss right now. And so we would have to sell that stuff. So I'm actually really happy that that money is there. And even though it's changing what it's meant for, it's only like a small part of the feelings. The main feeling is, I want a baby. I was talking to my doctor the other day. I was like, how can we get a baby sooner? Like, what do I need to do? I'm ready to be pregnant. So, yeah.
That's a wonderful outlook, and I'm impressed and I commend you. You got to give me some wins on that high note there, all that joy. What are some wins going on right now for you and your household?
Yeah, I think one win is that, having that decision to stay in the house, it actually like was really a relief to make that decision because I think that's actually going to be the thing that gets us closer to FI. So even though we're using this money, it's going to be, better because we are staying in a more modest living situation. So I think that's a win that we were even able to make that decision and we made that decision together. And that kind of just transitions to the bigger win there is that my husband and I talk about finances like we talk about the weather. There's no contention, there's no fighting. There's sometimes disagreements about how we want to approach things, but it's disagreements is even a strong word. It's like, well, I would do it this way, but I would do it this way. Okay, well, let's think about maybe what the best way is. And then we just talk about it. And I feel like that's a win because finances can be one of the main reasons people get divorced, right? And we just don't have that problem. And so I think that's a big win for us. Yeah. So those are probably my two biggest ones. And I'm about to go through my review process at work and probably get a raise. So that's a win, but I don't know if I am yet. So I didn't want to really say that because I might not. It would be weird if they didn't give me at least a cost of living adjustment. I'm sure I'll get that. But so hopefully a raise is coming in soon so I can get that income even higher and up that savings rate.
That's right. You took the words right out of my mouth when you said that you're staying in the house and that you think it helped you with some like mental stressors. I'm just telling you, as someone who stayed in his house for a long time, I can promise you the future financial Meghan and Chris will be happy with the Meghan and Chris of today. As your family grows, you may not be as thankful, but as your income grows, which you just mentioned, as your income grows, your current house payment will become less and less significant and therefore accelerate and accelerate and accelerate your savings rate, which I think is incredible. And even as your equity potentially grows, should you choose to sell and level up to your next house, you'll be faced with an interesting choice. Do we take all this equity and apply it to the newly upgraded, more expensive house? And what will that do to our mortgage payment? Or do we look at it and say, actually, we want to claw some of this equity back and dump it into X to maybe work on your brokerage account or whatever? It's an interesting, good problem that you'll face. We'll call it a win. Perfect.
Yeah. What would you do?
I don't know. I would have to be, so I am very mathematical, very, very mathematical to like a fault. So I would literally take what is the total equity amount? And if I apply it to the new situation, what's my new payment going to be? And then I would say, if I take the minimum down of 10 or 20% and put that down, what will the situation be? And I'd have to look at those numbers. And to frame this in a slightly different way, today I could pay off my house and my rental home, just cash some stocks out of my brokerage account. I could pay them off and be completely debt free. I choose not to do it because of the arbitrage. I think the way that I think about it is with my brokerage account and the 4% rule, I can pay my mortgage while my stocks continue to appreciate at an outpaced amount. So I'm never going to touch the growth. And well, I would touch some of the growth, but I can still 4% roll and pay for both those things to exist. So why would I? And that's the way I would look at this as well. And it's impossible to know what I would do because I don't know the increase in the price of the home compared to the current home that you're in. And I don't know what the interest rates will be at whatever that made up date is in the future. So if all things were equal, I could probably math it out. We can't do it live here, but if they're not equal, I think it would take some tinkering and the ability to then kind of understand where we might land.
Yeah, because that will be our reality at some point. I mean, we are selling Chris's house in June. We're recording this in May, early May, and we're actually kind of wondering where to put the money because we don't know when we're going to buy the next house because it's going to depend on when we have the child. We would like to stay here until kindergarten starts. A year before that starts, that's probably when we would want to buy the next house because we want to be in this school system. But we say that, and that might be a 5-year time frame from now. But if we're living here and we have the baby, and our neighborhood is a cool neighborhood, but sometimes things can get loud. And I was like, if we find it challenging to have our baby go down for a nap because we got this car going by that sounds like they're racing down our street, or we have, our neighbor who likes to sit outside with his subwoofer and play 90s hip hop music, which is fun, but also right next to where the baby's room is going to be, and he's not willing to stop doing that, we might want to move sooner. So we are actually unsure where to put this money. So I know this is a little bit outside of the scope of what we wanted this to be, but how would you think about that kind of problem? Because I'm very curious about somebody else's point of view.
Yeah, the black and white answer is relatively simple, which is if you want to touch the money within 5 years, and it sounds like you have a very realistic chance that you want to touch that money within 5 years, the answer is simple. It doesn't go anywhere near a total stock market index fund or anything like it. And I would consider this a win, even though it may not feel that way, because it will get eroded a bit by inflation. Okay. So stick it in a high yield savings account, or in my case, I still use my high yield savings account, but only for a small amount of money. Most of my savings is in my Vanguard brokerage account in a specific money market fund that earns a little bit more. All that to say, in today's dollars, you are getting 4.25%, 4.3% interest, which is far better than what we lived out in our 20s, where we'd be like, gosh, I can't believe I have to let that money sit there. Now, the question will be, is that 4.25% that you get today going to be on pace with or exceed the rate at which that neighborhood appreciates from its current value today to its future value, right? Which will outpace the other. And so if it about breaks even, terrific. You're going to have that money. It's going to be there waiting for you. If that neighborhood is slower to appreciate and you outpace it, then great. But I see you saying that's not going to
Yeah,
be the
no,
case. It's going to outgrow it.
Yeah, it's one of the most desirable neighborhoods in Durham. So, because like what we were thinking of is probably not a CD, because CD interest rates are basically the same as high yield, but you lock it in. So there's that. Or what about a balanced fund? So like a 50-50 stock bond. What do you think about those?
I'm not familiar with those funds because this isn't a problem I've tried to solve for myself. And so often my knowledge, if we can even call it that, is based on my own personal experience, because I not selfishly, I searched for what I needed in this life. And if I haven't been asked to help somebody else with it, I haven't come across it. So I don't really know. What I would maybe look at, and I think this is tough because when we talk about the glide path of prepping for retirement, they talk about starting that somewhere between 5 to 7 years and maybe even 10 years out from your retirement. And what I think is interesting about that is your retirement's a really long period of time. And so the glide path to that is one type of glide path. What you're talking about is almost more like, I started putting money in my kids' 529s, and now they're 13 years old. I'm going to need to use this money in 5 years. What do I do? And I don't know why the purchase of college feels different to me than the purchase of your retirement, because it is just a purchase, right? You're choosing to no longer have income, right? Why would that glide path be different? But I feel like it is. So you may want to research what's recommended by the FI community to those that are dealing with the 529s coming up on child being 18 and needing to use the funds. And that may be applicable to your situation and help inform your thought process.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And it's different because college only lasts 4 to 6 years.
Yes, it's
Retirement
not the
lasts 30
same.
years. It's not the same. So, yeah, no, that's a great idea. And because I think putting it in cash for 5 years is too conservative. And there's always that question, is there a middle ground? And I feel like the answers tend to change. At Campi Spain, though, we heard from this woman who works at Morningstar, Christine Benz, and she talked about the bucket strategy for retirement. And you've got your cash bucket, your fixed income bucket, and then your equities bucket. And so I think what I'm going to research is that fixed income bucket, because that's where I think I need to be looking at this money, because I think that's where that money really needs to be. Plus, maybe not all the money goes in there. Maybe we do like half in cash in the high yield savings and half in this fixed income and see how it does. But that's what I might research, because I think that that's going to be more optimal. And like I said, this Wood neighborhood, definitely the houses increase more than the standard 3-4% of most real estate. It's definitely faster. This whole area is usually faster than the standard. Even in 2008, it never went down. It just flattened. That's how awesome the housing market here is.
I'm interested to see what you find in that hunt that you go on. And as you said, retirement is different than college, because college is a 4-year period and retirement is forever. That was my ultimate. But as you started to say that, I started thinking, well, college is different than a home, because you're going to live in that home and have that payment for somewhere between 15 and 30 years, where college is 4 years and it's finite. So very interesting. But last question, any life hacks, any recommendations, any learnings that you might have that the rest of the community could take advantage of or benefit from?
Okay, I'm going to have to think about this one because I didn't think about this beforehand.
This is literally your script.
I know. You would think I would have thought about this when other people, because I don't know. I don't do life hacks. I don't. I'm a weird person. I don't do the same things as other people do. People are like, oh, read this book. I'm not a big book reader when it comes to nonfiction books. I don't like reading them. I find them actually incredibly repetitive and boring. I tried to read Die with Zero. I could not get into it. I was like, oh my God, I already know all this stuff. So, okay, here's a life hack. There's this one program called Blinkist, and it's a book summary app. So it gives you 15 minutes of a summary of a book with key insights, key themes, key ideas, all from nonfiction books. And I'll put a link in the show notes, of course. So, yeah, if you're not a big reader, meaning of nonfiction, I prefer podcasts. I just like the dialogue, the story. I like that a little bit better. I learn better that way rather than just being talked at. There is a statistic that says that reading, you only retain 5% of the information. So I'm not totally crazy in thinking this, but Blinkist is a great app to use if you're not a big nonfiction reader, but you want to get that information.
Well, I will see and piggyback on your hack, because I just sent a new team that I absorbed at work, another portion of a division that I took over at work. I just told them, hey, if you want to understand me better, here's the 4 or 5 books that informed me and my leadership style really strongly. Please, if you want to read them, by all means. If you want a snapshot, go here. And so I'll give you one example to throw in the show notes. So if you just go to YouTube and type in mindset book review. So Mindset is a book by Carol Dweck. I love it. You type it into YouTube and a book review, you'll find a handful of people do these sketch drawings with a 10 to 12 minute summary, and you watch it visually and you listen to the themes, and you come away with enough of an understanding from the book to not be able to go and hold a conversation about what happened when the group is supposed to read chapters 3 through 9 over the weekend and be ready to talk about it on Monday. You aren't going to be that ready, but broadly high level, you'll have an understanding of what it may be. So I think that's terrific. Well, Meghan, everybody who listens to the show pretty much knows who you are, but if they'd like to reach out and connect with you, how might they be able to do that?
Yeah, sure. So my website is everyday-fi.com. And there is a form on the main page where you can sign up to be on the show, but you can also just reach out to me there if you want to. I kind of took down the contact page because I'm rethinking what I want EverydayFI to be. It morphed from a primarily Instagram-based company called A Latte Money, so a lot of money. And it morphed from that to EverydayFI. And so the website was kind of a jumble of me trying to figure out what I wanted to offer. And so I'm kind of refiguring it out. And so I'll add a contact page back in eventually, but I want to think of what it is. But anyway, if you want to get in touch with me, that is the form to do so. Or you can email me, Meghan@everyday-fi.com as well. But I am not on social media right now. I can't stand it. So if anybody wants to run my social media for me, please reach out because I'm not doing it and I will not. I do have YouTube though, so you can also leave comments on the YouTube video. That will be in the show notes if you're just listening to this on a podcast. One other thing I would request of people too, it's not necessarily a way to get in touch with me. I mean, you can, but I am a one-woman show. I record, produce, edit, search out guests. I do it all by myself. And it does take time. It does cost a little bit of money. And so if you are willing to support me, one thing I would ask is if you could please listen to the ads that are on here. I know they're annoying, but they do allow me to get a little bit of income. It is literally fractions of a cent for every listen. So it's not a whole lot of money. So the more listens I get, the better. And if you also want to support me in a more real way, I do have a Patreon, and I'll put that in the show notes where you can go. It's in every show note. And I am trying to think through how I want to offer more premium content to people. So that will become something that will have something more robust in the future. But right now, it's just a $5 a month subscription just to support the show. I haven't given any extra benefits except that you're just supporting me quite yet, but I will eventually. I just have to think through what I want it to be. And so that's going to be something that's coming. So if you guys would do that, that would be awesome.
Well, terrific. Thank you so much for your time and doing this today. You have a great story, and I think people are going to benefit from a lot of the conversation that we had. I think we took a couple turns maybe off course, and that's okay. That's what tends to happen in these things, and there's probably a lot of wisdom laced throughout our discussion. So thanks so much to everybody for listening to the EverydayFI podcast.
Yeah, Mitch, thanks for interviewing me. And thanks for adopting my hat and talking to me. And for the outro, I'm going to take it from here. Thanks for listening to the EverydayFI podcast. If you're loving this show, here are some things you can do. Number 1, subscribe in your favorite podcast player and share the show with your friends and family. You can also find us on YouTube now. Some of the videos actually have our faces. Number 2, please leave a review. I am always looking for ways to improve the show. Number 3, check out my website, everyday-fi.com, where you can listen to all the episodes and leave comments for myself and the guest. Number 4, if you're interested in sharing your own financial independence story and connecting with other community members, you can find a submission form at everyday-fi.com/podcast. And lastly, number 5, join my Patreon membership for only $5 a month at patreon.com/everydayfi podcast. This is a one-woman show, so every little bit of support really helps. See you next time as we continue to go down the path to financial freedom.